I feel like Oscar season is starting earlier and earlier all the time.
Oh my gosh. No, it's true. At one point, I feel like there was this short 2 or 3 months where all, everybody talking about were awards.
Yep.
Now it's almost all year round.
So one of the staples of Oscar bait are the true story movies.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been seeing 3 previews I wanted to talk about real quick. Have you seen the preview for Boy Erased?
I have. It's 2 Australians playing American Southerners.
Yes. Probably because, real American Southerners would say this is a really bad portrait of the American South. It's about Lucas Hedges, who is in Manchester by the Sea, got an Oscar nomination, plays a young gay boy who is the son of a Baptist preacher, and they send him to conversion therapy. And it looks like it's going to be
So Russell Crowe plays the Baptist minister, and his wife is played by Nicole Kidman.
And as sad as this movie is going to get, Nicole Kidman's church lady bottle blonde is going to get me through it. That's all I have to say about
it
that.
looks like it's well acted. I think Russell Crowe's probably going to put in a brilliant performance as well.
Yeah.
Just throwing that out.
The other one is Keira Knightley as Colette, the author. And this is like Big Eyes all over again, right? Remember the Tim Burton movie, Big Eyes?
Right.
Where a man is taking credit for his wife's art, and she eventually doesn't like that. Apparently, that is Colette's real story. She wrote a novel that was The Toast of Paris, and she did it under her husband's name.
Right.
And everyone thought he was the author of this brilliant novel, and it was really her. And so it's about that.
It looks like she's breaking out of trying to say, okay, I did this for you. Now I'm going to do this for him. And he resists a little bit. It feels like she wrote Gigi.
Yes. And by the time she got to Gigi, it was under her own name. So I'm assuming that it's all going to work out well. But parts of it were like, oh, kind of tough. The fun one.
This one, everybody, I don't know anyone who's not looking forward to this.
Bohemian Rhapsody.
Yeah.
Rami Malek is playing Freddie Mercury.
It's Freddie Mercury as channeled through Rami Malek. I mean, it's amazing in the previews, the similarities, but also the band looks alike. It looks like the band.
Brian May looks like Brian May. I mean, it's just they all do, and it looks fun. And
How
I'm sure
it lose with that music. But I mean, it's a lot of hashtag Oscar bait. I'll be honest.
Tons, but you know what? I'm here for it. All 3 of them look great. I'm looking forward to all of them.
Attention. Pop surgeons Eric and Stacey, please report to operating room 1. Pop surgeons Eric and Stacey, please report to operating room 1. Surgery is about to begin.
This is Popperation. I am Eric.
I'm Stacey.
And this week we are talking about a movie from 2006.
Yes, Queen!
Called The Queen, starring Helen Mirren as Queen Elizabeth II. Directed by Stephen Frears, probably best known for Dangerous Liaison, as well as Philomena, the great movie with Judi Dench. This movie was, even though we hate them, nominated for 6 Oscars, including Best Picture, Best Director, Best Original Screenplay, a couple others, and one for Best Actress. Helen Mirren picked up an Oscar for playing QE2. The plot of this movie, pretty simple.
Takes place within 1 week, I believe. 1 week. And it is when Princess Diana died.
Yeah.
She was killed leaving a hotel in a tunnel in Paris. Paparazzi were after her. Her brother and many people blamed them for her death. Of course, after that, it was found that her driver had been drinking
and taking
and nobody was wearing
narcotics.
their seatbelts. I mean, there was just a lot of things in there. Yeah, they had paparazzi after them, but who's to say, what?
I still think it's probably a combo. I mean,
I agree. Based on everything that I've heard, and again, I'm not privy to everything, believe it or not. But what they have put out there, the Paris police as well as the British, it sounds like the paparazzi and the speed of the car exacerbated everything. But there were a lot of other, there were choices that were made all the way down the road that kind of factored into this. It's unfortunate. She was young. I think she was 36. And had a lot to live for, a lot of life ahead of her, a lot of good things she could have done. And she had 2 sons that could have benefited from, having their mother a little longer.
Very much.
the plot is how the royal family and the British government to an extent, but really just the British government, how they dealt with the royal family dealing with this issue. The big thing, and the thing that colors everything the royal family did, is that they underestimated what the world's reaction to Diana's death would be.
Yeah.
They totally underestimated how people felt about her, how strongly they felt connected to her. And they then overestimated, at least according to this movie and Helen Mirren's version of The Queen, overestimated what the British people wanted from her. She says, stoicism, that was the key word, and that's what you did. You stiff upper lip. That's what you did in World War II during the bombings and all of that. And that's what got you through everything. And that's what she grew up in. And here she is in, this totally modern age where there is, we weren't at internet speed at the time, but the world was much smaller.
Yeah.
And there were TVs everywhere. There was 24-hour, TV stations going on. People saw or had access to so much. And so you get a little inured and you need reactions. And she was being stoic when her people and the world, but she really didn't care about that. She cared about the British people, which is right. They needed to see something, and Liz had a hard time.
And this was also colored by the fact that the royal family, mostly made up of, in the movie, you see mostly the Queen, Prince Philip, the Queen mother, Queen Elizabeth's mother, also Elizabeth.
Yep, and
Charles. Charles felt sorry for her. Charles still had a soft spot for Diana, at least how it's depicted in the film. I think he felt bad about what she went through because he recognized that this marriage was a sham from the very beginning.
I found it interesting. I found how they personified him is interesting because, that was a different take than what we see from Charles.
In life. But the rest of the royal family didn't care much for Diana. I mean, really did not like her.
And that was their frustration, was that they're like, what we know about Diana is not what the public knows. Well, okay, that may very well be true. She could have been a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. But guess what? The world only knows Dr. Jekyll. So you've got to show, or we're going to turn on you.
But that was part of, I think, the struggle was, not wanting, being stoic and stiff upper lip and all of that. And you wonder, because the movie never really tells you, but you wonder how much of that is also, oh my God, she's finally out of our hair. And she's, when they wake up and they're like, we have news about Diana. And the thing is, what has she done now? And they really are at the end of their rope with her. So for them, the memory is not even all that cherished.
No, it's not.
Really.
And I agree. They had issues with her. She was not the perfect person for them, and they were frustrated. And it's not till later on in the movie that the Queen starts going, oh, crikey. When they show the interview that Diana did, and it's clearly not what the royal family's perception and take is, but it took several days, obviously, for Elizabeth to finally realize, okay, we need to do something different than what we're doing right now. And in the movie, it took Prime Minister Tony Blair
to do that. So let's talk about this cast. Amazing cast. Obviously, Helen Mirren is at the center of the entire thing. The movie is called The Queen, and it's all about her. Helen, best known for movies like Red, where she's really sexy,
and she's an assassin. I mean, the thing about Helen Mirren is she literally can do anything. And it was a tour de force, but she does that. I mean, I like Red, and Red too, because she's wonderful.
Yeah,
she's absolutely delightful. So easy to watch on screen.
Yeah,
and it's good because you need to have a warm person playing this character because you have this character doing some cold things.
Yes. And I watched the little making of featurette after I watched this movie. She loved playing Queen Elizabeth. There was something about, and she did this little hand motion. Because every time I would take what was about to start, she'd kind of pull her hand behind her head and then force her finger to kind of just do a straight line from her eyes all the way out. And she said that put me in Queen Elizabeth's head because for her, it's just everything is kind of kept inside. And the only thing that you see is this very straight, steady line. And she said, I really admire her sense of obligation, her sense of duty, but also her self-discipline and her, just how incredibly buttoned up she had to be in order to be the queen that she felt she needed to be.
Interesting that you say that. At one point in here, she's talking to her mother, and she says, maybe it's time that I step down. And her mother says, remember what you promised. Remember what your commitment was.
Yes.
You committed to do this for life.
To God.
To God.
To God and the British people.
And to the people.
Yeah.
And so there's that feeling that she can't get out of it. So it's like, if I can't get out of it, I'm going to have to deal with it. But there's a sadness about that because there is that trapped feeling. Again, you needed a warm actress to really pull this off well. And of course, Helen Mirren is it.
And I also think that there's something about, an actor not ever playing the villain, right? So even though Queen Elizabeth does some, as you say, pretty cold
can't judge
things,
themselves.
But in Queen Elizabeth's mind, she's always sincerely trying to do the right thing. She's so bound by this sense of duty that even when she's making a mistake, which she does admit throughout this movie, that the initial reaction to this was a mistake, she believes she's doing the right thing. And so her heart's in the right place. And that does really come through.
Right. And I think that you can't judge your own character if you're playing the villain, but she's not the villain in this movie. I think for several days in reality, I remember, and that's part of what was interesting about watching this movie is that I remember when these events were taking place.
Yeah. Diana died in 1997. It wasn't that long ago.
I remember when, they would show the castle in London with all of the bears and letters and all of that stuff,
flowers.
Which, by the way, they had a lot of real life footage in this. And so you saw what was really happening. And my daughters were watching with me the movie, and I said, this is real. This is not what they had to fake and recreate. This actually happened. And it was almost like the scene of Dead Confederates or Hurt Confederates and Gone with the Wind. It was so vast. But I remember seeing that on television, and I remember going, why don't they say anything? Why doesn't the royal family come out and say anything? And this is kind of the backstory as to here's one reason why. This is an option as to why. And again, as you said, her commitment was to her grandsons.
Mm-hmm.
And she wanted to do what was best for them. And at the time they thought it was, let's take them away.
Well, they were already in Balmoral. I mean, they were up in Scotland when this happened.
Let's do more stalking.
But let's stay here. We're up here. We're safe. We're secluded. Let's just stay here because that's the best thing to do and let this kind of thing ride out. And I think they all just, again, to your point, they completely underestimated what this is going to be. As Tony Blair, Michael Sheen, who I know from Masters of Sex. Did you ever watch Masters of Sex?
I've seen
on Showtime?
One episode, yeah. But I've seen him in lots of stuff, and he's played Tony Blair at least 2 or 3 times.
He's got the face.
He does have the face for it, and he's very good at it. And he's another one who's just very charming. He's lovely to look. He's fun to watch. I love his persona on screen.
Yeah, he's very lively.
They were very good together, I thought.
Yeah, and the art directors of this movie and the little making of thing made a big point of saying, there's a real distinction between the Blair household, which even though you're in 10 Downing Street, which you think might be austere, just look like a suburban kitchen with 3 little kids and just kind of, there's cereal all over the table and there's
books and
just stuff,
toys all over the floor.
And then you compare that to all the stuff that's happening in the palace, and which is very austere and it's very, reeks of tradition and all that kind of stuff. That it really becomes the movie to me was about these two figures kind of battling it out, in a way, because he is her chief antagonist in this thing. And by antagonist, I don't mean the villain of the piece at all. He comes across probably better than she does.
There was really no villain in this. This was really more of just a slice of time and an idea of what could have been the motivations behind what actually happened in history. And so,
but there are two very different points of view about how we need to respond to this.
He's coming from the government side,
and he's more modern,
and it's a new government, and she's coming from tradition, as you said. That is where she's coming. This is what we've always done. This is what we continue to do. This is what the royal family is. So I think that for me, it was more of a struggle with the royal family and Elizabeth specifically trying to maintain order of what it used to be and fighting against what society was now.
She's just following the old rules, and the rules have changed.
They
Society
totally
has
changed, and she wasn't aware of that. And I think that that's what I saw. And what you saw, and because she's such a good actress, you could see that internal struggle in her going back and forth.
As Prince Philip, best known for 6 Feet Under and Babe, James Cromwell played Prince Philip in this. And as I came back to The Queen, I just watched it this past week to kind of prepare for this. I was a little worried because I remember he played this role. I like James Cromwell a lot as an actor. But having seen the first 2 seasons of The Crown and knowing a little bit more about the royal family than I did back in 2006 when this came out, I was worried that the depiction of Prince Philip would be a little bit too positive. And I was so relieved to see that he's such an asshole.
No. And what to me, I had forgotten that he was such an asshole until I watched this, in this movie. I'd forgotten that they had put him out there as that until I watched it again this week as well. And I'm like, yep, that's him. I mean, literally anything you see that's been made in the last 20 years about Philip, same guy. So he's a bit of an asshole, and I probably wouldn't like him. And
there's lots of really subtle things in this movie, in his performance, but also in the way that the movie is made, that depict that he really still at this, I mean, he's been the husband of the Queen for so long and still doesn't like it, that she is the boss of the country and officially the boss of him. That when he says, let's do this, and she says, no, I think we'll do this instead. And he just bristles, like still, he cannot handle the fact that he is married to someone who outranks him.
Well, what gets me about this performance is that, so this and The Crown and whatever, the Windsors, which is that silly.
So funny though.
So funny. But the thing is that, so you have these different performances, different writer coming from different kinds of texts, coming from different directors, none of them connected whatsoever. And yet the character of Prince Philip seems to be fucking consistent. It makes me feel like that's who he really is.
Probably. When I lived in the UK, I lived in Scotland in the 80s. I remember when Fergie and Andrew got married. I was in the UK for that wedding. And I thought Prince Philip was a stand-up guy. That's how the British media at the time kind of showed him. And he was a little craggy at that point, but a very tall, handsome, striking figure. It was only as an adult that I've kind of learned a little bit more about the royal family and went, oh, he's a dick. But
that was also the 90s. And all of the scandal hadn't happened at that point. Yep. Fergie and Andrew, Diana and Charles just married. So the scandals hadn't started. And I think that the British public probably saw a little bit more of the realness of him. I think he was always like that.
Oh, he's been a dick since forever.
Right. So I think they saw that when you have 24-hour news cycle, shit's going to come out.
Yeah. So Alex Jennings, from your favorite show, A Very English Scandal, played Prince Charles.
This was a weird take. As I said before, this was a weird take on Charles. It is not what I feel like we've seen. Certainly not at that time. We hadn't seen at that time we kind of didn't like Charles, and I say we, most of the world, because we felt like he was pushed Diana out because he had this, Camilla and all of this other stuff. And again, he was playing the stoic card, always, tried to do like Mom said.
Mm-hmm.
So this, when he's sitting there saying, I think maybe we should go to London, and his mom says, nope, we're not going to do it. I'm like, really? Would he, he didn't like her. Now, how they were able to brush over it was to say that he was saying that because, he's like, well, she is the possible king's mother. I mean, she's going to be the mother of the future king of England. So maybe, maybe he had learned throughout the whole mess that he needed to really be careful of his PR. And maybe that also explains this character. But this was not a character of Charles that I'd seen before. It was sympathetic.
I'm going to suggest that this characterization of Charles was convenient from the perspective of the writer. They needed a foil within the royal family during those scenes so that the Queen could be confronted with somebody other than Tony Blair on the other end of a telephone. It just made it a better movie.
I guess, except here's the thing. It looked like she had no respect for Charles or his opinion ever.
And that might very well be true.
I think that's very possibly true. But my point being that if you don't have any respect for his opinion, then what do you care what he says?
Because the audience was on his side. Because when he said, he went to Paris to collect the body. He was there when the military folks were marching it back into the plane. He says in the movie, and maybe this is true, maybe it's not, I really regret not bringing my sons to see their mom, there. They should have been there. They should have come to Paris. They have that great scene in the car where he says to her, say what you want about Diana. She was a fantastic mother. Those boys always knew that they were loved, and then illustrates all the reasons why she was a great mother, which seems to be pretty opposite of everything that Queenie did.
Well, and she makes a comment later on and says, so he said that I wasn't warm. Like, well, sweetie,
he taught me all about motherhood. Yeah. Well, and the truth is that you can see that Diana was a much more publicly affectionate, and the Queen even says this. Oh, she especially hugged those children whenever there was a photographer around.
And I do think at one point Charles does say, or is it Tony Blair? Maybe it's the Tony Blair. They were talking about Charles and saying, he is looking out for his own skin. That if she gets kicked out of the queendom, that Charles would be able to take over. So he's trying to look good in the public's eye, no matter what his mother is doing.
Yeah. Helen McCrory played Cherie Blair. And this was the voice in the film of the anti-monarchist, the one who really is just like, we should just retire these people and we have no use for them anymore. We should be more of a democracy. Tony seems to have some sympathy for that point of view, but just says it's unrealistic that the British people will ever give up their royal family, which I think is valid of him to say.
Until that week, of course, and which, he keeps telling the Queen it's getting dicey here, and she's not understanding that.
Yeah. But this is the role that kind of says, let's plop her in every once in a while just to put a voice in the room to say.
She's also some comedy relief. She has some great lines.
Yes. But why do we have these? Why do these folks even exist? Like, why is this even a debate between Tony Blair and, the Queen of how to handle it? Like, the Queen shouldn't even be here. So what are we all here for? My favorite little performance in this whole thing was Sylvia Sims. As the Queen Mother.
What a fun role, to do. She had some fun lines as well, but also it was great to see Sylvia fucking Sims doing a job.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I kind of actually thought she was dead.
I haven't looked. I mean, it's been.
She made me now, but at the time this was made, I was surprised to see her still around.
Yeah, best probably known for A Woman in a Dressing Gown, when she was a little itty bitty thing playing the other woman in a movie about an adulterous affair that was very, very scandalous in the 50s. And she's great. She's got some great comic timing. Rounding out the cast is Bill Clinton, Tom Cruise, Tom Hanks, Elton John, Nelson Mandela, Steven Spielberg, Luciano Pavarotti, Tracy Ullman, Camilla Parker Bowles, Dodi Fayed, Earl Charles Spencer, and Princess Diana, all starring as themselves.
Lots and lots of stock footage, but at the same time, I will say it helps so much. And it helped me, again, some of this is because I was around when that was live. When they were showing that shit live, I was watching the TV. And so to see it in this documentary, or rather biopic, film, it just brought it all back. I was just kind of reliving it again. I thought it was great. And you forget. And my daughters were like, was that Tom Cruise? And there was also Tom Hanks was in there too.
Yes.
Yeah. So, but it's like, I said, yes, they were all, did you say his name? You did say his name. They were all, she knew all these people. But she was beloved. That's the whole thing. And that's the whole point of this movie, is that they just didn't get it.
Yeah. And, it's funny when Philip has this great line when he's talking about the funeral coming up, it's full of actors and homosexuals, Oh
my gosh. Again, it was like, I feel like we really do know who Philip is, because every single time an actor in the 21st century does him, it's all the same.
Yeah. Jerk. So we're back. We're talking about The Queen.
Biopic.
Yes, Queen.
That's what I call this, but it's a little different because it's not about her whole life.
And it's better because it's not about her whole life. It is a hill that I'm going to die on.
Well, I'm going to say again, and I just said this a minute ago, was I liked just concentrating on this week because nobody understood at the time it was going on. We didn't understand why nobody was saying anything. And it was so frustrating because we were all Tony Blair going, just say something.
Yeah.
Come to London and act like you give a damn. And that was the problem.
And the Queen is not a politician. It's interesting. She technically runs the government, but she doesn't have to run for office. She is the Queen. And because of that, she doesn't have the mind of a politician. Right. And so really this is about a leader realizing that the rules have changed and she's got to change the way she leads. It's a movie about leadership in a lot of ways. And it tells a really interesting story because it focuses on that one week. The reason I say it's a better movie because it focuses on that week is because The Crown, which is happening on Netflix, has decided that in order to tell Queen Elizabeth's story, you really need an 80-hour movie to do that, which is what we're getting. And that's what Netflix is good for, right? Is it gives us an 80-hour movie about the Queen's, amazing reign. This is not a biopic in that it doesn't claim to tell her entire story. It's a moment in time in which all that history comes back. I mean, you hear a lot about the abdication and her father having to take over by surprise and his early death and her becoming the queen at a very young age. But you don't need to dramatize that in order for that to inform this story in a really beautiful way.
Yeah, I think that it was, as I said, I think that it was really, really well done. And one thing that I think that Stephen Frears does, and if you go back even to Dangerous Liaison, there's this habit he has. He is really good at getting these intimate performances. There are times when the camera is just on her and you can see everything. There's a performance going on, but there's no action taking place. How's that sound?
Yeah.
And Stephen Frears is really good at being able to do that. He does that with Tony Blair's character. He does that with Cherie, Tony Blair's wife's character. He does that a little bit with Charles, and obviously he does it a crap ton with the Queen.
Mm-hmm.
But
less so with Philip because he's such a dick.
We have bad-mouthed Philip. And what I will say is that while I think it's possible that is exactly how he is, it is kind of a caricature. You know what I'm saying? So you're right. He doesn't get those special moments because I guess we just don't really give a fuck. And, Frears is British, right? So I don't even know. I mean, I don't even know if anybody, I think everybody in England and the UK knows that he's an ass and they're just like, whatever.
He's just your crotchety old racist uncle that you just put up with.
He is. He totally is. He totally is. But I think that it was, as I said, it was a moment. I agree with you. It's a moment in time, but it's an interesting moment in time.
Very.
Because it was also, you're talking about its leadership. Yes, it is. It is that battle of who is going to lead this country. And how are they going to do it? And is it going to be Tony? And that was what was interesting, is it because he kind of shot, if he was going to become the prime minister, i.e. president of the UK, that was a great opportunity. He's the one who helped fix her reaction.
Yeah.
So he kind of took away his own power.
Well, and I think he also realized that the royal family wasn't going anywhere, even though, the polls looked terrible when he told her that 1 in 4 Britons now want to get rid of the monarchy. That's still a 75% approval rating. Think about our presidents in the U.S. 74% is
no, that's not
golden.
but that's not an approval rating. They're fine with the monarchy. The problem, I think
not
you need to
necessarily approving
differentiate.
of
That's
them.
not. It's not 75% approval. It's 75% will say you can stay.
Approval of the monarchy. I mean, approval of the whole system.
Right.
75% is pretty amazing. And, for her to be so stunned by that, and he was stunned by that as well, because for the Brits, that, 1 in 4 wants to get rid of the monarchy is as high as they'd ever seen that. That's 25% of the country. Anybody who is a president of the United States, or a prime minister of England for that matter, anybody who's democratically elected on a regular basis, who can get 75% of the people going, you can stay.
Oh, no, yeah.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
And at the end of the movie, when she finally shows up to see all of the, spoiler, Tony wins this little battle and the Queen eventually says something. She shows up and sees these cards that say you were too good for them. And them clearly means the rest of the royal family.
Yep.
And how they abused you. And she's standing and very stoically, as she is wont to do, taking in that this is the pulse of many of her citizens.
And that's what it was.
Who preferred Diana to the rest of the royal family, and definitely sees a dichotomy there. And she walks over to this little girl who's got a bouquet of flowers and says, would you like me to place those for you? And the little girl says, no. And you can see on Helen Mirren's face, it's like, oh, she doesn't want me to touch her flowers for Diana. And she's so hurt by this. And finally, this little girl says, these are for you, and hands her these flowers. And it's this moment of, she's still got them. And the British people are never going to get rid of their royal family.
Well, what happened is, so it took 4 or 5 days, and it was a dicey situation. And Tony Blair was saying, it's dicey, you got to do something. And it got really, and she goes and she sees all of these teddy bears and notes and whatever, and she's like, it is dicey, it's really dicey. But what happens, then we talk, after they come out and they look at the notes, and she has that moment with the flowers and all of that, there's a conversation between Tony and his wife, and it's like she turned him around in 2 hours. 2 hours. They were, torches and guns or whatever to get rid of the monarchy, but within 2 to 3 hours, she was able to turn him around. But at the very beginning, when Tony first becomes prime minister, his wife, again, she has a lot of good lines, but it's also that commoner point of view, and that, and she says, he comes back and she's like, I can't believe you're going to let her do blah, 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 blah. And he says, well, and he starts, talking about giving her rationalizations, the Queen rationalizations. And his wife looks at him and says, you know what? Every single prime minister comes away from a conversation with her all gaga for her. I don't know how she does it, but they all walk away.
And she specifically says Labour prime ministers, which is the working man's party. And, it's like, you're supposed to stand up for us, and you all fall in love with her.
And she calls the Queen his girlfriend throughout the rest of the movie.
Yeah.
So how's your girlfriend today?
Now, there was one scene in the film that strained credibility for me a little bit. I liked it, but I kind of wish that it had been played differently. I would have directed Michael Sheen a little differently here, is when he's standing around with his staff and they're watching her on I think they're watching the Queen's statement when she finally did say something. And one of them says something like, ugh, why is she even here? Or this is so lame. This is so not.
Well, they didn't believe her. They said that wasn't believable.
Yeah. And he stands up for her in a really strident way. And I kind of would have said, you know what? You're the prime minister, Michael. I would have said, you tone down this line reading a little bit. It's a small,
he was a little
quibble.
defensive. It felt a little defensive.
But he does say, think about who she is. She is trying to do a job that killed her father. And to her eyes, Diana tried to destroy her entire life's work. And for her to stand up and say anything nice about her, let's give her her due. And I thought that was cool. I wish it wouldn't have been so shouty, because I think we would have gotten the point probably even better had it been delivered a little bit more quietly. That was just a different way to play the moment. Yep. So I quibble a little bit with Frears and Sheen on that choice. But it's interesting that by the time the movie was over, they were definitely on the same side, these two. They liked each other in ways that they didn't at the beginning.
They definitely garnered a respect for each other. And she understood, which I think, she had just gotten this new prime minister. You don't know whether they have your back or not. And he proved during this week that he had her back.
Yeah.
And that he was not, even though he was the Labor Party, he was not an anti-monarchist. He wasn't out to get rid of them. He was there to serve. He was there to serve as her government head.
Yeah.
And that's what, it was cute when, at their first meeting, and he's like, he starts getting very official and says, I would like to formally ask that and she goes, shh, I ask you.
Yeah.
You don't ask me. And he's like, oh, okay.
Right.
And so that was, again, what that did is it showed rather than told all the audience, this is how it works.
And in that same exact scene, she just happens to drop Winston Churchill's name, like bloop. I've been around, Sonny. This is not my first time at the rodeo.
Well, and as I said, there is that thing that she's had prime ministers that worked with her. She's had prime ministers that worked against her. She doesn't know who this guy is. She knows he's Labor. So there's a very big possibility there's a little bit of that rebellion stuff going on, but she doesn't know him. And I think if I was able to drop Winston Churchill's name, I would be dropping it too. I mean, but again, I think that this movie also put her in perspective that her first prime minister was Winston Churchill, who got Britain through World War II.
And yet it was interesting watching this after The Crown, because when you see, old Winston Churchill and young Queen Elizabeth interact in The Crown, it was pretty contentious. It's not exactly like Winston Churchill, met her and bowed on one knee and was totally subservient to everything she wanted.
No, not
They
at all.
had a few battles.
He had a huge ego by that time. He felt like he did own Britain. So that was a whole nother game. But he's long gone. And that's part of her history. But I think that's the whole point. And that's part of what this was kind of a love letter to her, quite frankly, in my opinion, saying, we forgive you because we get it.
Yeah. And like I said before, I think for me, this movie really did kind of, if you bring it down to its bare essence, it's really about these two characters. It's about the Queen and the Prime Minister, these people in these two different roles, and how they have to negotiate this stuff because he is democratically elected. I mean, not really. He's not elected the way a president is. His party gains power. His party then elects him. So no one writes down a prime minister's name on a ballot.
Like Speaker of the House, right?
Yeah, but there, in the absence of an executive, the party chooses the executive, which means that in the UK, the prime minister always has a majority party, which is nice. But sometimes anyway, different than ours, but close in that there are democratic elections. And Blair's all about listening to the constituents and saying, here's what the constituents want.
But he's also new. He's still new.
Yeah, he's got a better pulse.
To do that.
He's got a better pulse, but his political career depends upon making sure the citizens are happy. Hers does not. I mean, she can piss them off for a little bit of time and quote unquote do what's right and give the people what they need as opposed to what they want. She's a little bit more of in that realm. And so it's two very different kinds of power that are looking at this particular situation, complicated by the fact that she has complicated feelings about Diana, because while the public Diana was a saint, the private Diana was apparently difficult to live with at times. And I can believe that, actually. Yes. So while the Queen eventually, behaves as Blair advises, like we said, they do come to understand each other. He wins out in that his way of dealing with the situation is eventually what she does. And she has to eat quite a bit of crow.
She does. She does.
To come around and to admit that she was.
And I think that what this movie is it's an option as to how things. We know historically what actually happened. We know she did finally, after a week, get on the air. It's not a glowing anything. It's not well done. I remember watching it going, oh my God, I don't believe a word you just said. Didn't matter. It didn't matter. But the whole idea is, so we know what actually happened, but the idea of how, she was, and at the time when I saw her do it and I was so judgmental, I wasn't thinking, oh my God, she is eating a lot of crow right this second. She is having to swallow a lot of pride.
And interestingly, I believed Helen Mirren more than I believed Queen Elizabeth.
Oh my God. Helen Mirren, even in that, she was doing that whole thing deadpan, but it's one of those where you can't be as bad as Elizabeth was. You can't do it as a good actress.
Well, part of it too. I believed the movie version more than I believed the real version. Also partly because when she talks about her grief, I was connecting in the movie, her grief was really helping her grandsons, who I believe she does love dearly, get over the death of their mother.
Yes.
So that was grief in and of itself, is that the family had some healing to do, and she was committed to helping her grandsons get through this particular moment. So she did have some grief around the situation, even if she didn't miss Diana, the individual, very much at all.
Right. It helps my opinion of the real Elizabeth by watching what could have been her motives.
Yeah. One of the things we haven't really talked about yet, which makes this movie really interesting, is that this was a movie that was made about real people who were still alive. Most of them still are. You know, these events took place in 1997, so 21 years ago. When they made this movie, these events were only 9 years old. I mean, this was recent memory. And so here you have Helen Mirren, Michael Sheen, James Cromwell, Alex Jennings, all playing people, many of whom are their leaders, and are their royal family. So the monarchs who aren't going
anywhere. Except for James Cromwell, he's American, but everybody else is British.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, and you know, that must have been like really scary.
I think it would be just, Claire Foy in The Crown. I think it's easier to play Queen Victoria, I think, than it is to play Elizabeth II. They're just, because Elizabeth II could literally watch what you're doing.
Yes.
She could see what it is you're doing. And she probably did see the Queen. I'm just saying. I don't know. Know. Who knows? But I mean, the whole point is that she's
so disciplined, she might not have. She might have said, this will not be a good thing for me to watch. I will not do it. And that was probably fun. But, you know, if it were me, oh, hell yeah. If somebody made a movie about a week in my life, I would watch it.
But if someone said to me, I want you to play somebody who's alive and cognizant and can actually turn the channel and watch you.
And critique your performance.
Oh, my God.
On the internet, if they want to.
How much pressure is that?
Yeah, yeah. Although Helen Mirren, again, said she loved playing this role. When she approached it as a character, she said in these interviews afterwards, she said, I couldn't be under that much pressure. I had to say, this is a character. And actually, in the very first scene of this movie, Queen Elizabeth's having her portrait done. She's sitting for a portrait and she's talking to her portrait artist. And she said, I took a lot of inspiration from that scene. And she's like, I'm a portrait artist. And I'm an artist. You know, this is a portrait of the Queen. I have a certain amount of responsibility to portray her as accurately as I can, but I'm allowed to layer my own artistry on top of that. And so when I thought about it in that sense, I could do it. I could get up in the morning and get up in front of the camera and actually do this. Couple other fun facts about this movie. A lot of the sets were created solely from the imaginations of the designers.
I had a question. I was like, is that really what that looks like? Because I'm thinking, who told them what this looks like? Especially Balmoral.
Yeah.
When they were just hanging out.
No one's ever been in there.
Watching TV. And
no one has ever been in there. There are no photographs that these folks could look at. And my
guess is that if you go in there, you've signed some kind of NDA, man. There's just no way.
And certain rooms in the palace were also, but when they're all sitting around watching TV, no one has hung out with the Queen to watch TV at Balmoral and taken notes about what the room looks like. So in a way, that was really challenging, but in a way, it was very freeing for all of these designers. They say, we don't have anything, and no one's going to come back to us and say, this wasn't accurate, because no one's seen it. So we can create the kind of setting that really serves the story and not something where we're really slaves to what was actually real. But anyway, I thought that was interesting because I thought, oh, you're making this real movie. Obviously you were building, all of your choices on all of these things that we have. Although I loved the way the costumers did up the Queen when she's going out to, stalk the stag with her wellies and her tartan kilt. And she looks so dowdy, but that's exactly what she did.
Right. And it was interesting also, what we haven't mentioned is she has that moment when she goes out in her Wellingtons and she's driving and the Scottish keeper says, she's looking for the boys. And she says, well, they're stalking out, blah, blah. And she says, oh, that's near the river. And he's like, yeah, we can have one of the boys take you. And she says, no, I'll drive myself. It's kind of exciting to see this to know that she can drive. And one does forget, which they reminded us, that she worked as a mechanic in World War II.
Mm-hmm.
So that was, again, I liked how they were able to tie in some facts about her, but not hit us over the head like a history book. But so she goes out, goes to the river, she starts driving through, and sure enough, she gets flooded or something happens. And she's stuck in the middle of this. It's a shallow river. So she goes and sits on a rock. Cell phones were around, so she on her cell phone calls them. They're going to come get her. So that's not that. This is not the stress is not how do I get rescued. She's just sitting here and she has this quiet moment. She looks up and she knows that everybody has been talking about this 14-point buck deer, and which means it's a really beautiful rack of horns or whatever you call them, and antlers. That's it. And obviously, I'm a hunter. And so she looks up, and here it is. Here's this beautiful buck across the river, just staring at her. And they have this moment. And again, I think this is a Stephen Frears thing.
Oh, totally.
And that they have this moment, and you see it close up of the deer, you see it close up of her. And she gets sidetracked or distracted somehow, looks away and looks up, and the deer the deer's there, and she hears she hears
a shot.
Yeah, and she says, "Oh, they're coming." So she says, "Shoo, go away," and looks down and looks up, and the deer has gone away. Yep. And then later on, she finds out that the deer has been shot
by a neighboring castle.
Philip and the boys did not find him, but a neighboring the deer went off to a neighborhood's estate and was shot by tourists. And so she went, and that was a weird scene when she goes to visit, and of course you have the body is being hung up over a drain, and then the head has been cut off and it's over on a shelf. So she goes over there and has this moment with the head of this buck, and it was just a really, what is the word I want to say? It was a weird moment for me, but it was a moment of, because she liked the outdoors, she liked hunting, all of this. That's where she felt the most comfortable and the most free. And so it was a very personal moment. And I thought, I'm sure Elizabeth possibly never had that moment in real life, but it was really nice because it made me like you more. I
was sure it was symbolic of something. I just wanted to know what the stag was supposed to be.
I think it was because he was the top. He was the top, and he got out of where he was comfortable, and he died. That's my. That was my takeaway. I suppose everybody could have a different takeaway of what they saw in it.
I mean, I just didn't know whether he was supposed to be the old way.
Yeah.
That wandered away and got killed, and so but she was clearly, when she looks at him, she says, "Oh, you're such a beauty," or something like that. And then when she goes to see him again, it's like she's saying goodbye to an old friend. Yes. And it is something about the rest of the movie really is about the rules have changed. If you continue on the path that you've been going, you're not going to be around for very much longer. You must change.
And it's really been interesting because, so this was made in 2006. What has happened in the, 12, 13 years since then has shown that indeed, at the time we didn't know whether she was really going to change with the times. She has indeed. And, the royal family is stronger, a stronger figurehead than it's ever been.
Yeah. Final little note. I read this great article about the Queen when Trump went to visit the Queen recently. Apparently, she engages in what we call brooch warfare. She chooses her little brooches, however you say that, her pins very strategically. And when Trump landed in the UK, she was wearing a piece that was given to her by the Obamas, and a very simple piece given to her by the Obamas. Nice. When Trump met her, she was wearing a piece that was given to her by Canada in the shape of a snowflake. Like how, and apparently the people around her says, oh, she knows what she's doing when she picks up her jewelry every morning. And they went back to every wedding she's ever been to. A lot of times if she's going to a wedding and she likes the family, she'll wear something that was given to her by a relative of somebody who was given. I mean, she's very careful. She communicates volumes about that. And I don't know anything about this. I didn't do the research, or I don't know anybody if they have, or if the filmmakers even knew this at the time, but she's wearing one of those brooches in every single scene. And I was like, what does it mean? What does it mean? What does it mean? Anyway,
that's awesome.
That was my final fun fact about The Queen, not necessarily the film, but the actual Queen.
Yep.
Final diagnosis about the Queen, Stacey.
I think again goes along in our season in that this is something I think everybody should see. You can see it if on the one hand you don't really give a damn about any of the subject matter, you see it for a masterclass in acting from both she and a lot of the people in there. This is great, but certainly Helen Mirren deserved all the accolades she got. She is brilliant in it. On the other hand, for me, having lived through that and seen that, it was a lovely, inside look at a possibility of how it may have gone down or why it would have gone down that way. I just enjoyed it. I thought it was extremely well done. It was beautiful to look at. I don't really have a negative to it in that I think it's a good movie. And you sip brandy or wine while watching.
Yeah, I would concur with everything that you said. And the only thing I would add on to my little final diagnosis is it is to me about leadership. So if you don't give a shit about the royal family or all those internal politics, and you're not an actor and you don't want to watch a masterclass in acting, but you want to talk about something that helps you dissect what it is to be a leader and how much does the leader owe to the people that they follow? I mean, how much are you really leading, or how much are you led by citizenry?
But it's also about, you say that, but it's also about and the time that you're living.
Yeah.
Because her leadership style had to change.
Yes. And when you're a leader for, 80 years? Yeah. I mean, the longest reign in British history, you can't be the same leader that you were when you were 25.
This is a period in time that showed her that the public of her father's time and her beginning of her reign is not the public it is now.
Yeah. So fascinating movie. So much to kind of pick apart. And we could talk about that scene with the stag probably for an hour, but we won't.
We won't.
Take that time and actually put this into your streaming. By the way, when I went to go rent this movie on iTunes, the rental was $3.99. The purchase was $4.99. So purchased, done.
There you go.
$1, and I got all the extras. So highly recommended and pretty cheap to stream. So that's
The Queen on Pop-Operation. I'm Stacey.
Yes, Queen. I'm Eric.
And please catch us on Facebook, all your streaming podcast places, iTunes. Rate us. Let us know. Comment. Let us know what you want to hear, what you don't want to hear, what you like, what you don't like. And thank you for listening.
You've been listening to Pop-Operation with Eric and Stacey, the podcast that dissects popular culture one bloody organ at a time. Subscribe today on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, YouTube, and any other podcast listening site or app. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook at Pop-Operation Room. Check out our website at popoperationroom.com for all of the podcasts, our blog, swag, and games. Until next time, when we're back in the scrubs.
Okay, you're an idiot.